An old destroyer was driving at full speed straight at a wall of steel, and its captain was not trying to stop. He had already lost 2 men at the wheel to enemy fire. Below his feet sat 4.5 tons of explosive, the fuse already burning. His name was Stephen Beatty. The wall was a dock gate at Saint-Nazaire, on the Atlantic coast of occupied France. And to understand why a man would ram a bomb-filled ship into it on purpose, you have to understand what that dock could do. In early 1942, the German battleship Tirpitz was the most feared warship in the world. If she broke out into the Atlantic, she could hunt down the convoys that were keeping Britain alive. But a ship that size needs somewhere to be repaired when she takes damage. And on the entire Atlantic coast, there was exactly one dry dock big enough to hold her. It sat at Saint-Nazaire. It was called the Normandie Dock, built before the war for a giant ocean liner, and it was the largest dry dock in the world. The British logic was brutally simple. They could not easily sink the Tirpitz. But if they destroyed the one dock that could repair her, the Germans might never risk sending her out at all. Take away the dock, and you cage the battleship without ever firing at it. The problem was the dock itself. Saint-Nazaire sat 6 miles up a river estuary, ringed with coastal guns, searchlights, and a garrison of thousands. The approach was a maze of mudflats and shoals that any sane navy would consider impassable for a warship. Which was precisely the point. The Germans were confident no destroyer could ever reach the dock, so they left the seaward approaches lightly watched. That gap in their defenses was the whole opportunity, but exploiting it created a new trap of its own. A destroyer could only pass over those shoals on an unusually high spring tide, and that tide would only come for a few nights, on a fixed schedule that could not be moved. The raiders could not choose the safest moment. They had to arrive when the water allowed it. Whether or not the enemy was ready for them, the sea itself was setting the clock. That confidence became the plan. The raiders would do the thing that was supposed to be impossible. They chose an old ship for the job, HMS Campbeltown, a worn-out destroyer built in America in 1918 and handed to Britain. She was expendable. Her real weapon was not her guns. Engineers stripped her down to ride higher in the shallow water, then packed 24 depth charges into a steel and concrete case behind her forward gun, 4.5 tons of explosive in total, cemented in place so that nothing could shake it loose or pull it free. The whole ship was a delivery system for a single enormous bomb. Then they disguised her. 2 of her 4 funnels were cut away, and the remaining 2 were reshaped at an angle, so from a distance she would pass for a German destroyer. She would fly a German flag as she came in. Everything depended on buying a few extra minutes before the enemy realized what was actually approaching. The demolition of the charge fell to a young explosives expert named Nigel Tirpitz. He rigged the 4.5 tons to a set of delayed action fuses, chemical pencils designed to burn slowly and silently for hours before triggering the blast. That delay was the entire idea. The ship would ram the gate, the crew and commandos would get off, and only later, long after the raid was over, would the ship tear the dock apart. But a delay you cannot see is also a delay you cannot trust. Once those fuses were set, no one could be certain exactly when the ship would explode, or whether she would explode at all. On the afternoon of the 26th of March 1942, a flotilla left England Campbeltown, a motor gunboat carrying the 2 commanders, a torpedo boat, and a string of small wooden motor launches carrying most of the commandos. Those launches were the weakness in the whole scheme. They were made of mahogany, and they carried their fuel in tanks on the open deck. A single tracer round in the wrong place could turn one into a fireball. Around 600 men set out. Roughly half of them would never come back. They crossed toward the French coast and turned up the estuary in darkness. For a while, the disguise held. A German signal station challenged the strange destroyer, and the British signalmen answered with a captured German code, stalling, buying seconds. The searchlights swung over the water and moved on. The flotilla crept forward, deeper into the trap, closer to the dock. Then the illusion collapsed. The Germans finally understood that the ships in their river were not their own. Every gun on both banks opened at once. The estuary turned into a corridor of fire. Tracers crossed the water from both sides. On the bridge of the Campbeltown, Beatty ordered full speed, and drove straight ahead through the storm of shells. Armor plating had been bolted around the bridge, but the fire was so heavy it hardly mattered. One helmsman was hit. Another took the wheel and was hit too. Still the ship kept its line, aimed at the gate, 5 minutes away, then less. Behind and around her, the wooden launches were being torn apart. Some caught fire on the water. Men were burning, drowning, and still firing back as their boats came apart under them. And Campbeltown did not slow down. She could not. Slowing meant missing the gate, and missing the gate meant every man there had died for nothing. She hit the anti-torpedo net stretched across the entrance, ripped through it, and slammed into the great steel caisson of the Normandie Dock at 20 knots. The impact drove her bow 33 feet into the gate and crumpled the front of the ship, exactly where the explosives were buried. She had landed almost precisely where the planners wanted her. It was about 1:30 in the morning. The most dangerous part of the plan had worked. The bomb was now sitting inside the target. The commandos poured off the wrecked destroyer and onto the dock. Their job was to destroy everything that made the dock work, the pumping machinery that emptied it, the winding gear that moved its enormous gates. Assault teams stormed gun positions on top of the pump house with ladders and grenades. Demolition teams went for the machinery. In a matter of minutes, working under fire, they wrecked the pumping station and the winding gear. Even if the Campbeltown never exploded at all, the dock had just been badly crippled. But out in the estuary, the plan to get everyone home was falling apart. The little boats that were supposed to carry the men back to England were mostly gone, burning or sunk. When the commandos who had done their work turned back toward the water to be evacuated, there was almost nothing left to evacuate them. The commander on the ground, Charles Newman, gathered the survivors. There would be no ride home. His instruction to his men has become famous for how calm it was in an impossible moment. They had missed the boat, he told them. They would just have to walk home, fight through the town, and try to reach neutral territory on foot. Most of them did not make it. They fought through the streets of Saint-Nazaire until their ammunition ran out. Some were killed. Many were surrounded and captured. Only a handful of the raiders ever reached England again. Beatty, the man who had steered the ship into the gate, was pulled from the water and taken prisoner. And then came the wait, though only one side knew it was a wait. Morning came. The Germans swarmed over the beach destroyer wedged in their dock. They found no obvious explosives. The charge was sealed behind steel and concrete deep in the crumpled bow. To them, the raid looked like a strange, costly failure. The British had smashed a ship into a gate and lost most of their men doing it. What had it even achieved? The fuses Tirpitz had set should have fired hours earlier. The appointed time came and went, and nothing happened. To the raiders who knew the ship was armed, that silence was its own kind of agony. Perhaps a fuse had failed. Perhaps the impact had broken the mechanism. Perhaps the whole sacrifice had been for nothing. By late morning, the danger seemed to have passed entirely. Senior German officers arrived to inspect their prize. Sightseers and souvenir hunters climbed over the ship and crowded the dock. Among the crowd, by most accounts, were 2 captured British commando officers, brought along to the dock by their guards. They knew what was buried in the bow. They knew, roughly, what was coming. And they said nothing. Standing beside the men they knew the ship was about to kill, keeping the secret to the end. Somewhere nearby, Beatty was being interrogated. By one account, the German officer questioning him mocked the whole idea, telling him that a ship crashed into a gate could be repaired in no time. At that moment, at around 10:15, the Campbeltown detonated. 4.5 tons of explosive went off at once inside the caisson, at the exact spot the ship had buried herself. The blast obliterated the gate and everyone on and around it. Hundreds were killed instantly, including the officers who had come to gloat and the crowd who had come to stare. A great wall of water surged into the emptied dock. The wreck of the destroyer was gone. The Normandie Dock was destroyed. The delay had done exactly what the planners never quite dared to promise. It had waited until the enemy relaxed, then killed them in the heart of the very target they thought they had captured. The damage went far beyond the day. That single explosion put the largest dry dock in the world out of action, not just for the rest of the war, but for years after it. And with the one dock that could repair her now a ruin, the Tirpitz never did make her breakout into the Atlantic convoy lanes. She was hunted and eventually destroyed elsewhere, but the raiders had already achieved their real aim. They had taken the great battleship out of the fight by taking away the place that could heal her. 2 nights later, delayed action torpedoes fired into another gate during the raid finally exploded as well. The second blast sent the German garrison into a panic, and in the confusion they opened fire on shadows, and on each other and on the French townspeople caught in the middle. It was a grim coda to a night already soaked in cost. The price was staggering. Of the roughly 600 men who set out, well over 100 were killed and many more were captured. Less than half came home. For a single dock, on a single night, the raid consumed a generation of some of Britain's finest commandos. But the survivors and the dead together earned an extraordinary place in history. 5 men received the Victoria Cross for that one operation, Britain's highest award for valor, an almost unheard-of number for a single action. B-80 received his in recognition, the citation said, not only of his own courage, but of the many men of his ship's company who never returned. They had been asked to do something that looked impossible: to drive a bomb 6 miles up a defended river, ram it into the one door that mattered, and trust a silent fuse to finish the job hours after they were dead or captured. The astonishing thing is not that so many of them died doing it. The astonishing thing is that it worked.